You ever had the police called on you for using something you legally own? The metal handle of the main water valve was still vibrating in my palm when I heard the first siren cut through the dry Texas air, sharp and rising. Bouncing off the open acres like a warning I already knew was coming. Dust lifting under my boots as I turned and saw Brenda Whitmore standing at the edge of my fence line, one hand on her hip, the other pointing straight at me like she'd just caught a criminal in the act. Her white SUV idling behind her with the engine humming low and steady, the smell of hot rubber and perfume drifting across the fence, mixing with the scent of sun-baked dirt and old iron pipes. And I remember thinking how quiet everything had been just 30 seconds ago. Just me, the creak of metal, and the slow groan of water pressure dropping through a system my grandfather installed before Brenda was even born, but now the air felt tight, electric, like a storm rolling in without clouds. And she was already talking before I even opened my mouth, voice sharp, controlled, loud enough for the dispatcher still on her phone to hear every word. Yes, he just shut off the water. He's disrupting the entire community supply. And I almost laughed right there because the only thing I had shut off was a private line running straight through land my family had owned for 72 years, land that didn't answer to her HOA, her clipboard, or her version of authority, but I didn't say any of that. Not yet. I just wiped my hand on my jeans, felt the grit of rust and dry soil against my skin, and watched as the patrol car came into view over the ridge, tires crunching over gravel that hadn't belonged to the county in decades, the sun reflecting off the windshield so bright it forced me to squint, and Brenda stepped forward like she owned the moment, like she'd rehearsed this, chin high, shoulders squared, already building her case in real time. And I could see it in the way she glanced at the officers as they stepped out, that practiced smile, the kind that looks polite until you listen to the words behind it, the kind that assumes you're about to win. Officer, he's interfering with essential services, she said, pointing again, closer now, confident, almost relieved, like this was the ending she'd been waiting for, and I just stood there, boots planted in the same dirt my grandfather used to walk at sunrise, feeling the heat press against my back, hearing the faint hollow echo of empty pipes beneath the ground, and for a second, I let it all play out exactly the way she wanted. Because sometimes the fastest way to end a fight is to let the other person believe they've already won. And what Brenda didn't know, what she couldn't see standing there with her phone still in her hand and her story already locked in, was that this wasn't her scene to control. It never was. And every word she said was just another step deeper into something she didn't understand yet. Officer Daniel stepped out first, one hand resting lightly on his belt, boots crunching against gravel that had not been touched by county maintenance in over 30 years, his partner following a step behind with a small notebook already open, and I could feel their eyes scanning everything. The dry pasture stretching behind me, the old steel valve still angled halfway closed, the faded boundary markers that most people missed, but that mattered more than anything written on Brenda's HOA. Pressing documents, and the heat hung heavy, down like it wanted to hear how this played out. Brenda moving fast to fill the silence before I said a single word, her voice smooth now, controlled, almost rehearsed as she stepped closer to the officers. This man has deliberately cut off water access to multiple properties. We have families out here. This is a safety issue. And she said it with that same tone I had heard before at HOA meetings, the one that turned opinions into facts if you did not challenge it fast enough. But I did not move. I did not interrupt. I just let the moment breathe. Because I knew something she did not, something she had never bothered to check, and Officer Daniels gave me a quick nod, professional, neutral. Sir, is that true? Did you shut off a shared water supply? And there it was, the assumption already planted, shared, community, theirs, not mine, and I wiped my hands again, slowly, deliberate, feeling the fine grit grind into my skin as I looked past them for just a second, out toward the low ridge where the old pump house sat, paint peeling, tin roof rattling softly in the breeze, the same structure my grandfather built in 1968 when this entire area was nothing but open land and handshake agreements, long before Brenda Whitmore ever printed her first HOA newsletter. And I could still hear his voice in my head, steady and simple, telling me to document everything, to never rely on memory when paper could speak louder. And that was the thing about this place. Every inch of it had a story written in ink somewhere, filed, stamped, recorded, just waiting for the right moment. And this felt like that moment, but not yet, not quite, because Brenda was still talking, stepping closer again, lowering her voice just enough to sound concerned instead of aggressive. "We have a regulated system here, officer. He cannot just decide to shut it down whenever he feels like it." And the word regulated hung in the air like it meant something official, something enforceable, and I watched the younger officer glance toward the valve, then back at me, pen hovering, waiting, and for a second I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable, because silence does that. It makes people fill in the gaps with their own assumptions. And Brenda took the bait exactly how I expected, adding one more layer, one more push. "I already contacted the association board. We are prepared to file charges if necessary." And that was when I finally spoke, calm, even, no rush. "You might want to hold off on that." And I could feel the shift, small but real, like the air pressure changing before a storm breaks. Officer Daniels raising an eyebrow slightly, giving me space to continue, but I did not say more. Not yet. I just reached into my back pocket, slow enough for them to see every movement, pulling out a folded set of documents. Worn soft at the edges from years of being carried, the paper thick, official, stamped in a way that never fades, and I held it there for a second without opening it, letting the weight of it sit between us, because sometimes the truth does not need to be loud. It just needs to be undeniable. And Brenda's smile flickered for the first time, just a fraction, but I saw it. The moment she realized this might not go the way she planned, and I thought to myself, she still believes this is about water, she still thinks this is about control, but she is about to learn that some lines on this land were drawn long before she ever showed up, and they do not move just because she says they should. I unfolded the paper slowly, letting the dry air catch the edges so it made that soft, stiff crackle that only old documents make, the kind that carry weight before you even read a word. And Officer Daniels leaned in just slightly, not enough to break professionalism, but enough to show interest, while Brenda shifted her stance beside him, arms crossing tighter now, her confidence still there but thinner, like paint stretched over something uneven. And I turned the document so the seal faced them first, a deep embossed mark pressed into the page decades ago, the county insignia clear even through years of handling. And I watched the younger officer's pen pause midair as his eyes locked onto it. Because even without context, that seal meant something real, something official, something that did not come from an HOA office printer. And I spoke evenly, no rush, no need to push. "This is the original water rights deed for this property, filed in 1971 and reaffirmed in 1986 when the county updated its watershed records." And I let that sit for a second, because dates matter, history matters, and more importantly, precedence matters. And Officer Daniels reached out, taking the paper carefully, scanning the lines with the kind of focus that told me he had seen enough arguments to know when something was different, while Brenda stepped closer, leaning just enough to try to read over her shoulder, her voice cutting in again, sharper now. "That does not change the fact that you shut off water to homes connected to our system." And there it was again, her version of the system, her assumption that connection meant ownership, and I once again, slow, acknowledging the point without agreeing to it, because she was right about one thing. There were homes connected, but she was completely wrong about why, and I reached into my back pocket again, pulling out a second document, this one newer, cleaner, edges still crisp, and I held it up just long enough for both officers to see before handing it over. "This is the access agreement signed by your developer in 2019, I said, glancing at Brenda just long enough to see the flicker in her eyes, that moment when recognition hits before denial can catch up. And Officer Daniels shifted his attention between the two papers, connecting pieces in real time, his posture straightening slightly as the situation started to take a different shape. And I could feel the air change again, less tension, more clarity, like a fog lifting just enough to reveal what had always been there. And I pointed back toward the ground, toward the line where the old pipe disappeared beneath the dirt. That line runs through my property, feeds from my well, and is regulated under my permit, not the association's. And I kept my voice level, factual, no emotion, because facts do not need volume. They just need space. And Brenda stepped back half a pace, just enough that most people would not notice, but I did, her grip tightening on her phone, Her shoulders no longer squared the same way, and she tried again, faster this time. "We have community infrastructure." He agreed to provide access. And I nodded again, because that part was true too. Partially, but only partially. And I could see Officer Daniels already flipping to the second page of the agreement, eyes scanning for the clause I knew he would find, the one my grandfather insisted be included decades before any of this development existed, the one that made sure no matter how things changed around us, control stayed exactly where it started, and I let him read it himself. Because sometimes the strongest move is to let someone else discover the truth in their own time. And when his eyes stopped, just for a second, I knew he had found it, the exact line that changed everything. And I finally spoke again, quiet but clear. "Keep reading the part about operational control and emergency shutoff. Authority." And this time, I did not need to explain anything else, because the paper was about to do that for me. Officer Daniels stopped flipping pages, his thumb holding the edge of that clause like it suddenly weighed more than the rest of the document combined. And I could see it in his face, that small shift from routine response to something more careful, more deliberate, the kind of look officers get when they realize a situation is not what it was reported to be. And the younger one leaned in closer now, reading over his shoulder, lips moving slightly as he followed each line, and the only sound for a few seconds was the low hum of Brenda's SUV engine and the faint creak of metal from the valve behind me settling into place. And then Daniels exhaled, slowly, controlled, eyes lifting from the page to me, then to Brenda, and back again, recalibrating everything he thought he knew about why he was standing on this patch of land. "Ma'am," he said, turning the paper just enough so she could see it without taking it. "This agreement clearly states that operational control of the water source and distribution line remains solely with the property owner." And the word solely landed hard, heavier than anything she had said so far, and Brenda blinked once, quick, like her brain needed a second to catch up, and then she stepped forward, hand half reaching like she might grab the document, but stopping just short, her voice coming out tighter now, less polished. "That is not how our system works. We manage the distribution for the entire community." And Daniels then slightly, not agreeing, just acknowledging. "You may manage usage on your end, but according to this, you do not own the source, and you do not have authority over the shutoff." And the air shifted again, not tense this time but clearer, like a line had been drawn in plain sight. And I stayed exactly where I was, hands relaxed at my sides, letting the words settle without adding anything to them, because I did not need to. The paper had already done the work, and the younger officer flipped back to the first document, cross-checking dates, seals, signatures, the small details that turn claims into facts. And I could see the realization building piece by piece, slow but steady, like someone solving a puzzle they did not know they were holding. And Brenda's posture changed again, shoulders pulling back, chin lifting, trying to recover control of a situation that was slipping through her fingers. "He still disrupted service," she said, sharper now, leaning into the only angle she had left. And Daniels looked at me, giving me space to respond. But I did not rush, I just once calm. "Yes, I shut off my line," I said, and I could feel Brenda's attention snap to that admission, like she thought she finally had something. But I kept going, steady, measured. "Under the terms of that agreement, I am required to perform maintenance and emergency control when necessary, and I documented the pressure irregularities this morning." And I gestured toward the pump house in the distance, the old structure catching the sunlight just enough to stand out against the dry hills. There was a backflow risk developing, and if I had not shut it down, it could have contaminated the entire system. And I let that sit, because safety changes everything. And the younger officer's pen finally touched paper, writing something down for the first time since they arrived, and Daniels gave a small nod, the kind that signals understanding without needing confirmation. And then he turned fully to Brenda, his tone still professional but no longer uncertain. "Ma'am, based on what we are seeing here." He acted within his rights and responsibilities as the property owner and operator of the source. And that was the moment it shifted completely, the invisible line moving from accusation to explanation, from her control to mine. And Brenda's expression tightened, her lips pressing together just enough to show the crack beneath the surface. And for the first time since the siren started, she did not have the next move ready. Brenda's phone was still in her hand, But she was not speaking into it anymore. The line probably still open with the dispatcher listening to every word that was no longer going her way, and I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, fast and uneven now, like she was trying to rewrite the situation in real time. But the problem with facts is they do not bend just because someone needs them to. And Officer Daniels handed the documents back to me carefully, like they mattered, because they did, more than anything Brenda had said since she stepped out of that SUV. And the younger officer took a step back, glancing toward the dry pasture again, then toward the houses in the distance, the ones that had been built years after that agreement was signed, the ones connected by convenience, not ownership, and the wind picked up just enough to carry the faint smell of dust and old pipe again. A reminder that everything out here started long before anyone tried to organize it into neat rules and monthly fees, and Brenda finally spoke again. But her voice had changed, less certain, more defensive. "So you are just allowed to shut everything off whenever you want," she said, trying to frame it as unreasonable, trying to make it sound like control instead of responsibility. And I shook my head once, slowly, keeping my tone even. "Not whenever I want. Only when it is necessary." And today it was. And I could feel both officers watching closely now, not judging, just observing, piecing together the difference between authority claimed and authority proven. And I reached into my back pocket again, pulling out a small folded sheet, not as old as the others, but just as important, and I handed it over without a word, letting them read the timestamp, the pressure readings, the notes I logged that morning when I first noticed the irregular flow, the kind of documentation my grandfather drilled into me when I was barely tall enough to reach that same valve. And Daniel scanned it quickly, then slowly, nodding almost to himself. "You documented the issue before the shutdown," he said, more statement than question, and I called, "Every time." And that was when the younger officer looked over at Brenda, his expression no longer neutral, just slightly firm, the kind that comes from understanding. "Ma'am," he followed procedure, and he has the authority to do so. And the word authority hung there now, no longer hers, not in this space, not on this ground. And Brenda's shoulders dropped just a fraction, not enough to admit defeat, but enough to show the shift, and she glanced back toward her SUV like she might find a different angle there, a different argument. But there was none left that mattered, and the silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, not tense, not uncertain, just settled, like something had finally aligned with the truth underneath it, and I turned slightly, looking back at the valve, the metal now still. The system quiet the way it was supposed to be when everything was under control, and I thought about how quickly this had escalated, how fast assumption had turned into accusation, and how easily it all unraveled once the right paper hit the light. And behind me, I heard Daniel speak again, calm, measured. "At this point, there is no violation here." And just like that, the entire reason for those sirens disappeared into the dry air, leaving nothing behind but the reality Brenda had not expected to face. For a second, nobody moved, not even Brenda, and the quiet that followed Daniel's words felt heavier than the sirens that brought them here, like the land itself had settled back into place now that the noise was gone. And I could hear it again, the faint ticking of cooling metal from the valve, the low whisper of wind dragging across dry grass, the kind of silence that only comes when something unnecessary has been stripped away. And Brenda finally lowered her phone, the screen still glowing in her hand, her grip tight like she was holding onto the last piece of control she thought she had. And she let out a short breath, sharp through her nose, before speaking again. But this time her voice did not carry the same certainty. "This is not over," she said, not to the officers, not really to me either. More like she needed to hear it out loud to believe it herself. And I watched her carefully, not reacting, because this part mattered just as much as everything that came before. The moment where someone realizes the rules they rely on do not apply the way they thought did. And Daniels tilted his head slightly, his tone still calm, but now unmistakably firm. "Ma'am, if there are further concerns, you can address them through proper legal channels. But right now there is nothing criminal here." And that word again, criminal, the one she tried to hang on me just minutes ago, now completely gone from the equation. And the younger officer closed his notebook with a soft snap, glancing once more at the documents in my hand before looking back at Brenda, like he was measuring how much of this she actually understood. and I shifted my weight slightly, boots grinding against the gravel, feeling the texture underfoot, solid, unchanged, the same ground that had not moved for generations. And I spoke again, steady, not loud, just clear enough to carry. You built your system around something you do not own. And I could see that land, the idea of it, hit her harder than anything else, because this was never just about water. It was about control, about lines drawn on paper that did not match the ones under our. And her jaw tightened, eyes narrowing just slightly, searching for something to push back with. But the space was gone now. The room for argument closed the second those documents were read out loud, and the wind shifted again, carrying a faint metallic scent from the old pipes, like a reminder of where all of this actually started, not in a meeting room, not in a set of bylaws, but right here, buried in the dirt. And Daniels took a small step back, signaling the end of it. The official part anyway. "We are going to clear the call," he said, glancing at both of us. But his attention lingered on Brenda just a second longer, like a quiet warning wrapped in professionalism. And I nodded once, acknowledging it, not needing anything more, because everything that mattered had already been said. And as the officers turned toward their vehicle, the crunch of gravel marking each step away, I stayed where I was, looking out over the line where my land met everything else, knowing this was not the end Brenda wanted, but it was the only one. That did the truth, and the system beneath my feet remained exactly where it belonged, under my control, whether she liked it or not. The patrol car door shut with a dull, final thud, and the engine turned over a second later, low and steady as it rolled back down the gravel path, tires pressing tracks into dust that would be gone by evening. And I stood there listening until the sound faded completely, until the land went quiet again the way it always does when people leave and only truth stays behind. And when I turned back, Brenda had not moved far, just a few steps toward her SUV, but not inside it. Not yet. Like she could not quite walk away without trying to reclaim something, anything, and the sunlight caught the side of her face, sharp and unforgiving, showing every tight line around her eyes, every small crack in the control she tried to hold together. And she looked at me again, not with the same authority she had minutes ago, but with something more calculated, something colder. "You think this settles it," she said, voice lower now, less for performance and more for leverage. And I did not answer right away. I just glanced past her toward the line where the newer houses sat, rooftops catching the light, pipes running underground from a system they never questioned. And I could almost hear it, the assumption built into every faucet turned on without thought, every lawn watered without asking where it came from. And I shifted my stance slightly, feeling the dry soil settle under my boots, steady, unchanged. "No," I said finally, calm, measured. "This just clarifies it." And that word seemed to land differently, like it removed any illusion she still wanted to hold onto. And she let out a short breath, something between frustration and disbelief, glancing back at her SUV like it might offer her a better version of this moment. But there was nothing there except polished metal and silence. And she tried once more, reaching for authority that was not there anymore. "The association will review this. We have legal advisors." And I nodded once, not dismissing it, just acknowledging the reality of what comes next, because I knew something she was only starting to understand, that once something like this is brought into the light, it does not go back into the dark. It gets examined, documented, and corrected. And I looked at her directly this time, steady, not aggressive, just certain. "They should," I said, and the wind moved again, brushing past the fence line, carrying the faint metallic smell from the pipes and the dry sweetness of grass that had survived too many summers. And for a moment neither of us spoke, just standing there in a space that felt different now, stripped down to what was real and what was not. And she finally opened her car door, the hinge creaking softly as she paused halfway inside. One last glance over her shoulder, like she wanted to say something sharper, something final, but there was nothing left that fit the situation anymore. And she got in without another word, the door closing with a controlled click, the engine revving slightly before she backed out, slower than she arrived. Careful now, measured, and I watched her drive off until the dust settled again, until the line between my land and everything else was clear in front of me. And then I turned back toward the valve, toward the system that had been here long before her and would be here long after. knowing this was not the end of the story, but it was the moment everything changed, the point where assumption met reality and did not survive the impact. By late afternoon, the heat had settled into that slow, heavy kind that makes everything feel like it is holding its breath, and I was back at the valve with a wrench in my hand, turning it just enough to bring the system back online. The metal groaning softly as pressure returned, a deep hollow sound moving through the line like something waking up underground, and I watched the gauge climb steady and clean this time. No fluctuations, no irregular drops, just a straight, controlled rise the way it was supposed to be. And for a moment it felt like the day might end there, quiet, resolved, the land resetting itself like it always does. But then I saw the dust trail on the far road, thinner than before, slower, not a patrol because this time, something else, and I did not need to see the vehicle clearly to know what it meant, because problems like this do not disappear, they regroup, they come back dressed differently, carrying papers instead of accusations, and sure enough the truck that rolled up near the fence line an hour later had county markings on the side, faded but official, and two men stepped out, one older with a clipboard already in hand, the other younger carrying a measuring rod, and I leaned against the post for a second, letting the moment settle, because this was the next move, predictable in a way that made it almost disappointing, and the older man walked up with a polite nod, the kind that comes before a formal conversation. Afternoon, we received a request to verify water distribution compliance in this area, he said, and there it was, not a complaint, not an accusation, just a request wrapped in procedure, and I said back, calm, figured you might, I said, because Brenda was not the type to let something go without trying to reroute it through a different channel, and the younger one looked toward the pump house, then at the valve, then back at me like he was already piecing together what the paperwork would say, and I reached into my back pocket again, pulling out the same documents, edges worn but steady, and handed them over without being asked, because I knew exactly what they were for and exactly what they would find, and the older man took looking at them, flipping through with practiced efficiency, eyes scanning for signatures, dates, jurisdiction lines, the quiet language that defines ownership in a way no argument ever could. And I could hear the faint click of the measuring rod extending behind him, metal on metal, precise and methodical, like the land itself was being questioned inch by inch, and the wind carried a different smell now, cooler, with a hint of water moving through the pipes again, clean and controlled, and after a few minutes the older man looked up, adjusting his stance slightly, the kind of small shift that signals conclusion. Everything here checks out under your permit, he said, simple, direct, and I nodded once, no surprise, no reaction beyond acknowledgement, because this was never about proving something new. It was about confirming what had always been there, and he handed the papers back, adding, we will note that in our report, and just like that, the second layer of challenge dissolved the same way the first one did, not with noise, not with force, but with documentation that did not bend. And as they packed up their tools and headed back to the truck, I looked out across the land again, the houses in the distance unchanged, the system beneath them flowing on terms they did not set, and I knew Brenda would read that report, would see it in plain language, official and undeniable, and understand something she had refused to accept all day, that control is not something you claim, it is something you can prove, and out here, every inch of proof ran straight through my ground. The report arrived 3 days later, not by hand, not with sirens or raised voices, just a standard envelope in the mailbox at the end of my gravel drive, the kind that most people open without thinking, but I held it for a second before tearing it open, feeling the weight of what it represented more than the paper itself. And when I pulled the document out, the language was exactly what I expected, clean, precise, final in a way that left no room for interpretation, verification, ownership. Complete, confirmed, operational authority upheld, and I stood there reading it once, then again, not because I needed to understand it, but because I knew someone else would have to, someone who built their authority on assumptions instead of records. And later that afternoon I saw her again, not charging across the field this time, not calling anyone, just walking, slow, deliberate, stopping a few yards short of the fence line like she finally understood where it actually was, the real boundary, Not the one printed in HOA guidelines, but the one backed by decades of filings and signatures and decisions made long before she ever stepped into this neighborhood. And she held a copy of the same report in her hand, edges still crisp, the official seal catching the light the same way mine had days earlier. And for a moment she just stood there, looking at the ground, then at me, then back at the line between us, like she was recalibrating everything she thought she controlled. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I had never heard it. Not weak, just different. They felt this to the board, she said, holding the paper slightly, like it explained itself, and I once, because of course they did, because once something becomes official, it does not stay contained, it spreads through the exact channels that tried to ignore it, and the wind moved across the field again, carrying the faint sound of water running steady through the pipes beneath us, a quiet, constant reminder of what all this had been about from the start. And she let out a slow breath, her shoulders dropping just enough to show the shift, not defeat exactly, but recognition, the kind that comes when reality replaces assumption whether you like it or not. And I did not step closer, did not need to. The distance between us said everything already, and after a few seconds she gave a small nod, almost to herself, then turned and walked back toward her SUV. No urgency, no performance, just movement. And I watched her go the same way I had before, but this time it felt different, not like something unresolved, but like something completed, like a line had finally been drawn where it should have been all along. And as the sound of her engine faded into the distance, I looked back out over the land. The same acres my grandfather once walked, the same system running beneath it all, steady, controlled, untouched by everything that had tried to redefine it. And I thought about how quickly noise can rise when people believe they have power, and how quietly it disappears when that belief meets something stronger, something documented, something real. And I reached down, resting my hand on the cool metal of the valve, feeling the vibration of water moving exactly where it was supposed to. And I left it there for a second, grounded in something that did not need to prove itself twice. Because out here, control was never about who spoke the loudest. It was about who could back it up when it mattered. And when everything mattered settled, when every voice faded and every challenge was answered, the truth did not argue. It just remained.